What if it wasn't an accident that caused the fire? What if it was a centuries-long reckoning? 9 strong guys never emerged from a cellar beneath a southern home. The slave quarters were destroyed by fire. However, not a single slave was hurt. Nobody said anything. Nobody came forward with a confession. So why was everything erased by the county? Was it a curse, retaliation, or something much older? This is the fire and the night history attempted to forget. That would not die. To ensure you don't miss any of our investigations, subscribe to the channel right once and enable notifications if you want to follow true stories that defy time and uncover hidden realities. October 1861, Mississippi. Under the brittle sun, the field was white and expansive, with cotton bursting like quiet screams from its husks. In the center of this area stood the hawthorn plantation in majestic silence. Their windows stared blankly toward the hills like eyes too tired to cry, their wooden bones blackened with age. It was among the area's oldest estates. Founded many generations ago by the ancestor of Augustus Hawthorne, a Revolutionary War hero who is renowned more for his brutality than his honors. The plantation, now ruled by Augustus, had become famous and wealthy, its harvest abundant, its penalties renowned. The row, or slave quarters, were hidden behind the barns and out of view of the main house. Cages, thin-walled shacks with dirt, floors and tin roofs that snapped and whispered in the wind, these buildings were not dwellings. More than 50 individuals were kept there, their lives interwoven with the never-ending cadence of toil, fear, and quiet. They were not humans by law, they were not heard by custom. Strange murmurs had started to occur among them lately, though. Song fragments that were never sung out loud, cautions carved into wood, and stones purposefully arranged in circles behind the cookhouse. Slowly, a sense of uneasiness descended among the knights. Eliza, a 17-year-old female, was the first to notice the alterations. She frequently woke up with the taste of iron in her mouth and the smell of smoke in her nostrils. The oldest of them, Maria, whispered to her that spirits had increased. Restless. "Not ghosts, child," she murmured in a quiet, papery voice. Memory never stays buried." Augustus, the house's master, began entertaining guests from nearby counties, inviting them for lengthy dinners, late nights, and private conversations in the cellar beneath the great house. These men were respected community leaders, landowners, politicians, and clergy, and they arrived in elegant coats and darker attire. Even the overseer, a gaunt man named Fitch, who enforced order with a loaded pistol and a brutal hand, seemed unnerved lately, spitting over his shoulder when he passed the slave quarters and muttering prayers as he lit his pipe. It was rumored among the servants that they gathered around an old map, tracing lines and murmuring in a foreign tongue. A ledger that was discovered once and quickly hidden again tracked blood in addition to crop sales. In the quiet following the whip, Eliza remained up for hours, gazing into the night, convinced that something was moving just out of her line of sight, that someone was watching. On the evening of October 10th, a red handprint appeared on the cookhouse door. No one acknowledged placing it there, and no one attempted to take it off. 3 crows were discovered dead on the great house's front porch the following morning, their wings spread abnormally, their eyes gone, and Augustus ordered their burial. The cook reported seeing them still sitting on the chimney in the moonlight one night. 2 days later, 9 invitations were sent to the most influential men in the area, offering a private dinner as a chance to uphold the bonds of dominion and safeguard what was rightfully ours. The guests accepted without hesitation, and the silence in the quarters grew as Maria started drawing lines in ash around the sleeping areas, while whispering in a language older than English and older than the land itself. Eliza once followed her into the woods behind the cane field, where a small Maria crouched, put her palm on the ground, and muttered, "Let them feel what we have carried." The area had been swept clean, and 7 stones stood in a broken circle, with a little burnt doll fashioned of straw and black thread in the middle. Mariah just responded, "The fire listens and the fire remembers," when Eliza questioned what it meant. On October 12, 1861, the atmosphere over Lafayette County was thick with a haze that hung to the sky. 2 nights later, the meal would start. The fire would arrive and nothing would ever be the same. The house was dressed for the occasion with candlelight glowing in each window, silver polished, and the parlor scented with burnt sugar and rosemary. Servants moved between rooms like shadows, setting fine china and pouring dark wine into crystal flutes. The first carriage arrived at precisely 7 hours that evening, and by 8, all 9 guests had entered the house. The air had become unnaturally still, with no wind or bird song, only the low groan of wood settling beneath old weight. They were a judge, 2 bankers, several prominent planters, a retired army officer, a preacher whose sermons were known for their fire and fury, men of stature, wealth, and land, all white, all powerful, all implicated in the machinery that ran beneath the soil and cotton of the South. They ate roasted pheasant, smoked pork, corn pudding, and drank wine imported from Spain while they dined with Augustus Hawthorne at the long walnut table under the French chandelier. They ate roasted pheasant, smoked pork, and corn pudding, and at first their conversation was stiff. They talked about property, not land, but people. They exchanged numbers and told stories of punishment that sounded like parables. One man told how he had branded a runaway across the chest to mark the warning, while another described the construction of a discipline pit. There was a low, contented laugh. Augustus stayed mostly silent, listening and observing. He appeared thinner than usual at the head of the table, with darker, more distant eyes. When dessert was served, he raised a glass and made a strange toast to preservation, of order, of bloodlines, of legacy. The others drank without question, and then, without being asked, they all stood up and went toward the cellar door. This was an unwritten custom that they had never done before, but never entirely. The gathering room was located beneath the main floor, past a hallway lined with books and sealed cabinets, behind a locked iron grate, and was a low-ceiling chamber of stone lit only by lanterns. The central hearth had not been lit in months. The air was humid. The walls had carvings that no church had, symbols carved in chalk and soot, interlocking circles and odd alphabets. The 9 men were standing in a circle, each in front of a candle, each holding a small object, a coin, a bone, a feather, a lock of hair, etc. Augustus took a small book from his coat and opened it without a ceremony. The language inside was neither Latin nor English, and the words crawled from his mouth as if dredged from the earth's surface. Eliza paused in the kitchen. The wind had returned, slipping through floorboards and under doors, carrying the smell of ash. One man, the youngest of the group, hesitated. He asked if this was really necessary. Augustus looked at him and smiled, for the first time that evening. "You do not bind a kingdom with prayers," he said. "You bind it with debt and fire." Above them the house creaked. The book burned as it always did at the end of the invocation, but this time the flame refused to die, dancing higher, licking the stone walls, hissing. The hearth cracked. The floor beneath them seemed to pulse as if something beneath was stirring. Augustus stumbled, coughing, his eyes watering. The others drew back, but the doorway had disappeared. She closed her eyes and moved her lips silently around the edge of the woods. "It's begun," Eliza murmured to Mariah as the iron grate refused to open. The servants disappeared upstairs, and one by one the doors clicked shut, leaving the captives standing silently and awake in the rooms, watching the dark horizon. At precisely 3:03 in the morning, 9 men below the earth started to realize what had come for them, and Mariah nodded once. It was never going to be a supper. Eliza was the first to notice the light, a flicker at the base of the quarters just beneath the floorboards of the middle shack. Not flame yet, just a pulsing glow. She stepped outside barefoot on the cold earth and stared one by one as a gust of unnatural force rushed through the rows of slave quarters, scattering ash and straw like scared birds. No alarm was raised. No dogs barked, but the air shifted, thickening with heat and something older, something buried deep beneath the plantation. In a single breath, the entire row of quarters caught fire. The walls cracked, the roofs heaved, a column of black smoke twisted into the sky, and no screams came from within. Men, women, and children joined her as they silently emerged from their cabins, drawn by the same pull. No one spoke, no one ran, and the light grew. Within seconds, fire exploded upward as if summoned by breath, not creeping from spark to spark, not growing at the whim of wind, because no slave was left inside the burning buildings. They stood barefoot in the grass outside and watched. Chaos broke out from the main house and servants hammered on doors. The overseer, Fitch, attempted to rally the guards, shouting commands that were lost in the roar of the flames, but his pistol misfired, and when he tried to open the cellar door to call for Augustus and the guests, he discovered that the hinges were scorching hot and the locks were warped. The men pounded harder inside the cellar, the smoke slithered through the seams, their eyes watered, their lungs burned. Someone screamed that they were cursed, another cried for forgiveness, and the fire leapt unnaturally, striking not toward the main house but inward, circling the quarters, trapping the cellar door in a ring of heat. At 3:47 a.m., the fire reached its peak. The sky turned red, and the ground trembled. However, the door would not open, and the stone walls shook. One of the house servants, a boy no older than 10, later reported that he saw a figure standing at the edge of the flames, a tall woman dressed in white, her eyes glowing like coals. She raised her hand, and the fire bent toward the cellar. The boy never spoke again after that night. The fire sank like it had been swallowed, and only thick, bitter smoke remained. The cellar door hung open now, and no one had touched it. The room was scorched black, and the floor cracked open in a jagged circle. Around it, 9 bodies, or what was left of them, were stilled after the flames coiled into the sky and then fell motionless, as if inhaling. The remains of the black leather book, untouched by flame or soot, lay in the center of the room. It had returned, its pages unburned, open to a single symbol drawn in red like blood. A spiral inside a spiral. They were all slumped or twisted, each in a different position. One had clawed at his own throat, while another had scratched the stone until his fingers bled. They had died in terror, not from fire or smoke, but from something else, something unseen, something they had attempted to bind, and failed. By mid-morning, word had reached the closest town, an urgent rider, pale and breathless, bearing news that Hawthorne Plantation had burned. Sheriff Luther Graves arrived just before noon, flanked by 2 deputies and a preacher. The quarters were reduced to ash, and the bodies of the enslaved were accounted for. Unharmed, untouched, and silent. Mariah stood at the edge of the ruin, holding Eliza's hand, and she said nothing. But in her other hand, she held a small blackened piece of iron, shaped like a key. The sky remained red long after the sun had risen. The main house remained, its facade blackened with soot, the windows dark, smoke lingering in the air like a scent that would not go away, and the sheriff was led to the cellar by a servant who said nothing, where he saw the aftermath, 9 corpses arranged around a blackened circle in the stone floor. They had expected chaos, riots, and death in the fields, but instead they found silence, complete, deafening silence. The stone beneath them was cracked, burned into a spiral pattern, and the center hollow looked as though something had been pulled down into the earth. The sheriff ordered the cellar to be sealed immediately, and the deputies attempted to document the scene, but their ink ran out. The sketches smeared, the chalk outlines refused to hold their shape, and the preacher vomited twice before a formal Inquiry was held within 3 days, but the process quickly collapsed. The original fire reports disappeared. The coroner resigned after looking at the remains. One of the deputies committed suicide after claiming he heard voices under his nose. When asked what had happened, the remaining household staff simply shrugged. Some wept quietly. Others just stared past the men as if something still stood behind them. The conclusion, hastily written and signed, described the fire as a freak act of God. But among the town's residents, the stories spread, not from the newspapers but over fences, across dinner tables, whispered behind gloved hands in church pews, that the house had not been destroyed by the fire. Floorboards at night, voices calling him by name, the judge recusing himself due to moral confusion. No charges were brought and no suspects were named. They claimed to have seen shapes in the smoke, tall figures with burning eyes. Others said they saw the 9 guests walking through the cotton fields days after their bodies were buried. The land was sold off in parcels. The Hawthorne name was struck from the deed. New settlers arrived, ignorant or uninterested in the past, but they left quickly. And they said the enslaved had been warned by dreams, ghosts, and ancestors. Then there were nights when the air itself would hum and steady, vibrating through the windows, through the bones, until sleep became impossible. One woman, an Ohio school teacher, moved into a cottage built on the edge of the former quarters. She stayed for 2 weeks, and on her last night, she wrote in her journal, "They come at 3:03. Fires refused to burn, children spoke to invisible friends, and animals refused to cross certain corners of the property. Below me, I can hear them moving in circles, 9 of them, always 9. Like wild mushrooms, local legends grew in complexity and eeriness with each new iteration. Some claimed that the fire was judgment rendered visible rather than fire at all. Others said that the book that had been discovered in the cellar was still on the property, cursed to return to the person who attempted to destroy it. Some people asserted that it was a door rather than a book and that it had opened. The site was eventually cordoned off by the town council. Private property, no trespassing, is written on a worn sign. However, decades later, kids still challenge one another to travel the perimeter at night and touch the gate. Some return with wide eyes and days of silence. Others never come back. The original deed for Hawthorne Plantation was greatly sought after in the county records. There was a folder, but it was empty. There were no maps or documents, just a piece of parchment with a single phrase written in ancient handwriting, stuck in the corner. The debt was paid off. The door is still there. The area that had housed Hawthorne Plantation is now peaceful, overgrown, and overrun by vines and weeds. Like a burial that was never intended to be marked, the dirt has engulfed the wreckage. Where the quarters used to line up like ribs, trees now lean. After being sealed with iron and concrete, the cellar was discovered decades later during an unapproved dig. What they discovered, or said they discovered, beneath it was never formally documented. In a few days, the entryway was once more concealed. Not a single press conference was held before the research team left town. At auction, their equipment was sold. Redaction was applied to their names. But the questions still stand. What actually transpired the night the quarters caught fire? Was there rebellion? Painstakingly organized and carried out with frightful accuracy. Was justice finally served after a lengthy wait? Or had it been something else? Something that existed beyond the bounds of logic, history, and physicality? The pieces have been dissected by historians for many centuries. In less than an hour, a fire destroyed a row of buildings, leaving 9 unexplained deaths in a space that was not exposed to natural flames and no injuries. The book in leather, it was thought, to have been destroyed in the cellar, but it later appeared in a private collection in Charleston, Prague, and then disappeared. Photographs taken close to the location in 1943 showed 9 different flares that only showed up in infrared exposures, along with blurs of light. They seized the negatives. a network of hollow chambers in the bedrock that weren't seen on any survey was reported by a geologist looking at earthquakes beneath the former plantation grounds. After that, he quit the field and became a minister. However, the most terrifying information is found in individuals, not in books or maps, descended from both the town's remaining residents and the enslaved. Only in October do they talk of dreams. Remember what they did. The knocking beneath the floorboards, the voices whispering the same phrases. Recall who was watching. Spirals appear on the palms of newborns. When the wind comes from the east, a preacher's daughter speaks in dead tongues. They still get together once a year on the evening of October 12th. Calm, reverent, with only candles and lanterns for illumination. There is no advertising for it. There are no signage displayed. Those who arrive are either blood or memory. Stones are arranged in a circle. Water is poured into the ground. They don't talk about fire. They do not speak of names. However, others claim that when the wind blows just right, you can hear something listening and 9 men sobbing beneath the ground. There is uncertainty at the end of the official records. No pictures of the victims stay put, no official admissions of misconduct. However, there is one more notation in the corner of an ancient sheriff's ledger that is hardly readable due to aging and ink buildup. The fire did not kill them. They were released from it by the fire. That night's legacy lives on in absences rather than books, in the stories that defy extinction, in what archives have forgotten, in the pauses. Between breaths it persists, in the manner that some people avoid using particular routes, in the way the sun looks reluctant to leave that field in the dark, as though it stays there longer. Was that a moment of justice slipping through, a curse or retaliation? Nobody is aware. However, you may feel the warmth rising beneath your feet if you stand there at night, right after the last of the light has gone out. Additionally, if you pay great attention, you may hear the door creak open.